The phone call shattered my Christmas morning at 7:30 a.m., jolting me awake in my Denver hotel room. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor back in Ohio, was sobbing into the phone about finding my brother Derek's children freezing on my doorstep. 8-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Tommy had been abandoned outside in 20-degree weather, while Derek flew to Alaska to watch the northern lights. He knew I was at a work conference. The kids were hypothermic when she discovered them. Child Protective Services had taken custody, and my parents were absolutely furious at me for somehow ruining Christmas. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone, my mind struggling to process what Mrs. Henderson had just told me. I immediately called the airline, desperate to catch the earliest flight back to Columbus. The next available seat was on a noon departure, which meant I would have to abandon the client presentation I had been preparing for months. My career could take a serious hit, but my niece and nephew needed me more than any business deal ever would. During the frantic packing process, I called my girlfriend Amanda, hoping she might have some answers about what had happened. Her voice was strained with worry as she explained that she had tried reaching Derek multiple times over the past 2 days, but his phone kept going straight to voicemail. What struck me as odd was her mention of driving past Derek's house yesterday evening and seeing his beat-up sedan still parked in the driveway. If he had really flown to Alaska to see the Aurora Borealis, why was his car still at home? The 3-hour flight felt like an eternity as I replayed every conversation I had with Derek over the past month. He had seemed stressed about money lately, constantly asking to borrow small amounts for groceries or gas. I had helped him out several times, thinking he was just going through a rough patch after his divorce from Lisa became final last year. Now I wondered if there were deeper problems I had failed to recognize. The moment I landed in Columbus, I drove straight to the Franklin County Children's Services building. The gray concrete structure looked imposing against the overcast December sky, and my stomach churned as I walked through the entrance. After waiting 20 minutes in the sterile lobby, I was finally called back to meet with caseworker Janet Morrison, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, but a weary expression that suggested she had seen too many tragic situations. Janet led me into a small conference room and closed the door before pulling out a thick file folder. Her voice was professional, but compassionate, as she explained the severity of what had occurred. The children had been discovered at approximately 6 a.m. by Mrs. Henderson, who was letting her dog out for an early morning walk. Sarah and Tommy were huddled together on my front porch, both wearing only lightweight jackets despite the frigid temperature. Sarah had early signs of frostbite developing on her fingertips, and Tommy was found clutching a stuffed elephant while crying uncontrollably. The timeline Janet described was deeply disturbing. Based on the children's accounts and the condition they were in when found, they had likely been sitting outside for at least 4 or 5 hours in sub-freezing weather. Sarah, being the older child, had tried to keep her younger brother warm by wrapping her own jacket around both of them. Both children were now placed in emergency foster care while the investigation proceeded. Janet then showed me the note Derek had left with the children written hastily on his insurance company letterhead. The message was brief and callous. Pierce emergency came up, had to catch last-minute flight to Fairbanks to see once-in-a-lifetime Aurora display. Back in a week. Take care of Sarah and Tommy, thanks Derek. The casual tone of the note, as if he were asking me to water his plants rather than care for his children, made my blood boil. After leaving the CPS office, I knew I had to call my parents to discuss the situation. Frank and Patricia had always been protective of their grandchildren, and I expected them to be as outraged as I was about Derek's reckless behavior. Instead, the conversation that followed left me stunned and questioning everything I thought I knew about my family dynamics. The moment my mother answered the phone, she launched into an attack that caught me completely off guard. "Pierce, how could you be so irresponsible?" she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. "Those poor children were counting on you being there, and you abandoned them for some business trip. Derek had an emergency and needed your help, but you were too busy with your precious career to be available when family needed you most." My father took the phone and continued the assault. Your brother has been working hard to provide for those kids since the divorce. Frank said, his tone cold and accusatory. He finally gets an opportunity to take a break and do something for himself, and you let him down. Those children are traumatized because you were not there when they needed you. This whole mess could have been avoided if you had just stayed home for Christmas like a normal person. I tried to explain that Derek had never contacted me about his travel plans or asked me to watch the children, but my parents were not interested in listening to reason. They had already decided that I was the villain in this situation, and nothing I said could change their minds. The phone call ended with my mother hanging up on me after declaring that I had ruined Christmas for everyone, and that they were ashamed to call me their son. Sitting in my car in the CPS parking lot, I felt completely alone and confused. My brother had abandoned his children in life-threatening conditions, but somehow I was being blamed for not being available to clean up his mess. Something about this entire situation felt wrong, and I was determined to get to the bottom of what had really happened. That evening, I decided to investigate Derek's supposed trip to Alaska. I called the customer service line for the regional airport and inquired about flights to Fairbanks on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. After being transferred to 3 different departments, I finally spoke with a supervisor who confirmed what I had begun to suspect. There were no direct flights from Columbus to Fairbanks, and no connecting flights through major hubs had departed on either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day due to the holiday schedule. This revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Derek had never left Ohio, which meant his story about watching the Northern Lights was a complete fabrication. My brother had deliberately planned this abandonment, timing it perfectly for when he knew I would be out of state and unable to immediately rescue his children. The calculated cruelty of his actions was almost impossible to comprehend. The next morning, I requested an emergency family meeting at my parents' house, determined to present the evidence of Derek's deception and force them to confront the truth. I arrived at their modest ranch home in Westerville, carrying a folder full of documents including flight schedules and airport confirmations that proved no flights to Alaska had departed during the time frame Derek claimed. My parents greeted me at the door with cold expressions, clearly still angry about our previous phone conversation. We sat in their living room, surrounded by Christmas decorations that now seemed mockingly cheerful given the circumstances. I carefully laid out the evidence on their coffee table and explained what I had discovered about Derek's fabricated travel story. Instead of being shocked by Derek's lies, my parents immediately began making excuses for him. My mother, Patricia, wiped tears from her eyes as she insisted that Derek must have driven to Cincinnati or Cleveland to catch a flight from a larger airport. "You know your brother," she said, her voice defensive. "He has always been spontaneous and adventurous. Maybe he found a last-minute charter flight or took a bus to Chicago to catch a connection." My father, Frank, nodded in agreement, suggesting that I was being too harsh in my judgment of Derek's actions. "Your brother has been under tremendous stress since the divorce," he explained. "Lisa has been making his life difficult with all her demands for child support, and his job at the insurance company has been very demanding. Maybe he just needed a break to clear his head and see something beautiful for once in his life." The conversation revealed a pattern of enabling behavior that I had not fully recognized before. Patricia admitted that she had been secretly giving Derek money every month because he is struggling as a single father and needs help making ends meet. Frank disclosed that he had co-signed Derek's car loan 6 months ago and had recently helped him consolidate his credit card debt. They had consistently covered for Derek's financial irresponsibility while expecting me to be the stable, reliable son who never needed assistance. When I pointed out that Derek's actions had put his children in serious danger, my parents became even more defensive. Patricia accused me of being jealous of Derek's free-spirited nature and suggested that I had always resented the attention he received as the younger sibling. Frank claimed that I was overreacting to what was essentially a miscommunication, and that the children were never in real danger because Mrs. Henderson had found them quickly. Frustrated by their refusal to see reason, I decided to visit Derek's house and gather more evidence of what had really been happening in his life. Using the spare key he had given me years ago for emergencies, I let myself into his two-bedroom rental house on the east side of Columbus. What I found inside painted a disturbing picture of Derek's deteriorating circumstances. The small living room was cluttered with unpaid bills, many of them marked with red, "Final Notice" stamps. Electric, gas, and water bills were scattered across his kitchen table, along with multiple credit card statements showing balances near their limits. The refrigerator was nearly empty except for some expired milk and a few boxes of cereal. In Derek's bedroom, I discovered evidence of extensive gambling activity. Hundreds of lottery scratch-off tickets were stuffed in a shoebox under his bed, along with receipts from local casinos showing significant losses over the past several months. His computer browser history revealed frequent visits to online sports betting websites and poker rooms. Bank statements showed a pattern of large cash withdrawals, followed immediately by deposits of much smaller amounts. The most shocking discovery was a collection of threatening voicemails on Derek's answering machine from what appeared to be loan sharks. The messages used increasingly aggressive language demanding payment of debts and threatening serious consequences if Derek continued to avoid them. One caller specifically mentioned that Derek owed $4,500 and that time was running out for him to make good on his obligations. I also found numerous letters from Derek's ex-wife Lisa's attorney demanding payment of past due child support. According to the documents, Derek was 4 months behind on his court-ordered payments and faced potential jail time if he did not bring his account current immediately. There was also correspondence indicating that Lisa had been trying to modify their custody arrangement due to Derek's unreliable behavior during his scheduled visitation periods. Feeling sick to my stomach, I decided to contact Lisa directly to get her perspective on recent events. I found her phone number in Derek's address book and called her that evening. Lisa was initially hesitant to discuss Derek's personal business with me, but she became more open when I explained that the children were in CPS custody and that I was trying to understand what had led to their abandonment. Lisa's revelations were deeply troubling. She told me that Derek had been skipping his scheduled weekend visitations with Sarah and Tommy for the past 2 months, often calling at the last minute with excuses about work emergencies or personal illness. When he did show up, the children would return to Lisa's house with stories about being left alone while Derek went out to bars or gambling establishments. Most disturbing was Lisa's account of Derek's behavior on Christmas Eve. He had called her around 10 p.m. asking if she could take the children for a few extra days because something important had come up. When Lisa reminded him that she had plans to visit her new husband's family in Cincinnati and could not change her arrangements, Derek became angry and accused her of being inflexible. The call ended with Derek hanging up on her, and she had not heard from him since. That evening, Amanda came over to my apartment to provide emotional support. As I processed everything I had learned, she listened patiently as I described the evidence of Derek's gambling addiction, financial problems, and pattern of neglecting his children. Amanda helped me understand that Derek's abandonment of Sarah and Tommy was not an impulsive decision, but rather the culmination of months of increasingly irresponsible behavior. Amanda also pointed out something that had not occurred to me before. She noted that throughout our conversation, I had been taking responsibility for Derek's actions and feeling guilty about not being available to prevent the crisis. This pattern of assuming blame for Derek's mistakes was something she had observed in our relationship, and she suggested that my family had trained me to be the perpetual problem solver who cleaned up everyone else's messes. The next day brought an even more shocking revelation when I decided to verify Derek's employment status. I called the main number for Buckeye Insurance Group, where Derek claimed to work as a claims adjuster. After being transferred to the Human Resources Department, I spoke with a supervisor named Margaret, who delivered devastating news. Derek had been terminated from his position 3 weeks before Christmas for what Margaret diplomatically described as irregularities in client account handling. While she could not provide specific details due to confidentiality policies, she strongly suggested that I contact the company's legal department if Derek's actions had affected family members. The implication was clear. Derek had likely been stealing from client accounts to fund his gambling habit. This information meant that Derek had been lying to everyone about his employment status for nearly a month. He had been pretending to go to work every day while actually hiding the fact that he had lost his job and had no legitimate source of income to support his children. The emergency trip to Alaska was starting to look less like a spontaneous adventure and more like an escape from the legal and financial consequences that were closing in around him. Armed with the knowledge that Derek had been fired from his job, I decided to dig deeper into his recent activities to understand what he had really been doing during the week leading up to Christmas. I returned to his house and spent several hours going through his computer phone records and personal belongings to piece together a timeline of his deceptive behavior. Derek's computer browser history told a disturbing story of someone who was completely disconnected from reality and responsibility. In the days leading up to Christmas, he had been active on multiple dating websites, crafting elaborate profiles that portrayed him as a successful businessman with flexible schedule and disposable income. His messages to potential romantic partners were filled with boastful claims about his financial status and bragging about having a free weekend with no responsibilities planned for the holiday. Social media posts from Derek's various accounts painted a picture of someone living a fantasy life. He had been checking into local bars and restaurants throughout Christmas week, posting photos of expensive meals and craft cocktails, while his children were presumably at home with minimal supervision. One particularly disturbing post from Christmas Eve showed Derek at an upscale steakhouse downtown captioned "Living my best life," with multiple wine glass emojis. The evidence suggested that Derek had been treating the past week like a vacation, from his parental responsibilities going out every night, while leaving Sarah and Tommy to fend for themselves. This pattern explained why the children seemed so resigned when he told them they were going to spend Christmas at Uncle Pierce's house. They had probably grown accustomed to their father's unpredictable behavior and frequent absences. I was granted supervised visitation with Sarah and Tommy the following day, and the meeting took place at a family services center designed to feel welcoming to children. The moment I walked into the cheerfully decorated room, both kids ran to me with relief evident on their small faces. Sarah, who had always been mature for her 8 years, immediately began apologizing for causing trouble, as if their abandonment had somehow been her fault. As we sat together on the floor playing with blocks and coloring books, the children gradually began sharing details about their recent experiences with their father. Their accounts were heartbreaking and revealed a level of neglect that went far beyond the Christmas Eve abandonment. Tommy, still clutching his stuffed elephant, told me about nights when Derek would leave them alone to go to work, even though they knew it was too late for normal work hours. Sarah described having to make peanut butter sandwiches for dinner when their father forgot to come home, and she had learned to help Tommy with his bedtime routine when Derek was nowhere to be found. Both children had been sleeping in Sarah's room because they were afraid to be alone when their father disappeared for hours at a time. The picture they painted was of 2 young children who had been forced to become self-sufficient due to their father's increasing irresponsibility. Most disturbing was their account of Christmas Eve itself. Derek had told them they were going to have a special sleepover at Uncle Pierce's house, but he seemed nervous and kept checking his phone while driving them across town. When they arrived at my darkened house, Derek became agitated when he realized I was not home. Instead of taking them back to his house or finding alternative arrangements, he simply told them to wait on the porch because Uncle Pierce would be back soon. Sarah remembered asking her father why all the lights in my house were off and why there were no cars in the driveway, but Derek dismissed her concerns and told her not to ask questions. He promised to call me to let me know they were there, but Sarah noticed that he never actually took out his phone to make any call. After giving them each a quick hug, Derek drove away, leaving 2 small children sitting alone in the freezing darkness. While the children's testimony was emotionally devastating, it also provided crucial evidence of Derek's deliberate intent to abandon them. This was not a case of poor judgment or miscommunication. It was a calculated decision to dump his parental responsibilities on someone else, without regard for his children's safety or well-being. Meanwhile, my investigation into Derek's financial situation revealed an even more complex web of deception and desperation. Among the papers scattered around his house, I found evidence that Derek had taken out multiple payday loans using his car title as collateral. The amounts were staggering. He owed nearly $8,000 to various predatory lenders with interest rates exceeding 300% annually. Credit card statements revealed that Derek had been using cash advances to make minimum payments on other debts, creating a downward spiral of increasing obligation and mounting fees. His checking account had been overdrawn for the past 6 weeks, and the bank had frozen his debit card due to insufficient funds and return check fees. Perhaps most troubling was a series of text messages I found on Derek's phone from people who were clearly not legitimate creditors. These individuals used threatening language and demanded immediate payment of gambling debts, with some messages specifically mentioning that Derek's time was up and that consequences would be severe if he continued to avoid them. The final message sent on Christmas Eve morning warned Derek that people would be looking for him at his usual places. This last piece of information finally explained Derek's motivation for disappearing during the Christmas holiday. He was not seeking adventure or trying to see the northern lights. He was hiding from dangerous people to whom he owed money. The Aurora trip story was his cover for leaving town until the heat died down, and abandoning his children was simply a convenient way to eliminate any obstacles to his escape plan. Derek's landlord provided another piece of the puzzle when I contacted him to inquire about the rental situation. Mr. Patterson, an elderly man who owned several properties in the area, was surprisingly forthcoming about Derek's housing problems. Derek had not paid rent in 2 months and had been served with formal eviction papers on December 23rd. The eviction was scheduled to proceed immediately after the Christmas holiday, meaning Derek would lose his housing within days of his planned return. Mr. Patterson also mentioned that Derek had approached him several times in recent weeks, asking for extensions and offering to pay partial rent amounts. The landlord had been patient due to Derek's children, but Derek's promises to catch up on payments had proven to be empty. Mr. Patterson felt terrible about the timing of the eviction, but explained that he could not afford to subsidize Derek's housing indefinitely. The complete picture that emerged was of someone whose entire life was collapsing simultaneously. Derek had lost his job exhausted, his credit options fallen behind on all his bills, and made enemies of dangerous people through his gambling addiction. Rather than face these problems and seek help for the sake of his children, he had chosen to run away and leave Sarah and Tommy to bear the consequences of his failures. This realization filled me with a mixture of rage and profound sadness. My brother had not made a single impulsive mistake. He had made a series of calculated decisions that prioritized his own comfort and safety over the welfare of his innocent children. The Aurora trip lie was particularly cruel because it painted him as someone pursuing a beautiful experience rather than someone fleeing from the wreckage of his own making. 5 days after Christmas, Derek finally made contact with our parents, calling their house while I happened to be there discussing the children's situation. Frank put the call on speakerphone, and I listened as Derek launched into an elaborate story about his supposed adventures in Alaska. His voice sounded relaxed and cheerful, as if he had been enjoying a pleasant vacation rather than abandoning his children in a life-threatening situation. Derek claimed that his phone had died shortly after arriving in Fairbanks, and that he had been staying at a remote lodge with no cellular service or internet access. He described witnessing incredible displays of green and purple lights dancing across the Arctic sky, painting a vivid picture of natural wonder that would have been convincing if I had not already uncovered the truth about his whereabouts. What struck me most about Derek's performance was his complete lack of concern for his children. He mentioned Sarah and Tommy only briefly, asking when he could pick them up, as if they were packages he had left at a delivery service. When Patricia mentioned that the children were in state custody, Derek expressed mild annoyance rather than parental panic, suggesting that CPS was overreacting to what he called a minor communication breakdown. Throughout the conversation, Derek repeatedly praised Pierce for being such a reliable big brother and expressed confidence that I had handled everything appropriately while he was away. His assumption that I would simply clean up his mess without question revealed how deeply he had internalized the family dynamic that positioned him as the irresponsible favorite and me as the perpetual problem solver. When Derek finally asked to speak with me directly, I could no longer contain my anger and disgust. I confronted him with every piece of evidence I had gathered: the flight records proving he never went to Alaska, the casino receipts showing his gambling addiction, the termination letter from his employer, and the threatening messages from loan sharks. I described finding his children nearly frozen on my doorstep and watching them break down as they described months of neglect and abandonment. Derek's response was initially denial, followed quickly by rage. He accused me of spying on him and violating his privacy by going through his personal belongings. When denial became impossible in the face of overwhelming evidence, Derek shifted to victimhood, claiming that I had always been jealous of his relationship with our parents and that I was now trying to destroy his life out of spite. The conversation escalated into a shouting match as Derek became increasingly defensive and irrational. He accused me of forcing him into debt through years of family pressure to be successful, as if my own achievements had somehow caused his gambling addiction. When I pointed out that his children could have died from exposure, Derek claimed I was exaggerating for dramatic effect and that Sarah and Tommy were tougher than they looked. The call ended with Derek threatening to make me pay for interfering in his personal business and warning that I would regret getting involved in matters that did not concern me. His final words were that he would find a way to get his children back and ensure that I never saw them again. The mask of charming irresponsibility had completely fallen away, revealing someone who was capable of genuine malice when his carefully constructed lies were exposed. In the days that followed, news of the family crisis spread to our extended relatives, and the response revealed deep divisions in how different family members perceived Derek's actions. My father's brother, Uncle Roy, and his wife Susan were horrified by Derek's behavior and immediately offered their support for my efforts to protect the children. They had noticed Derek's increasing erratic behavior at recent family gatherings and were not surprised to learn about his gambling problems and job loss. However, my mother's side of the family rallied around Derek with an almost cult-like devotion to protecting his reputation. My maternal grandparents, Grandma Rose and Grandpa Jim, insisted that Derek was being unfairly persecuted and that family conflicts should be resolved privately rather than involving government agencies. Several of my cousins echoed this sentiment, arguing that I was being too harsh and that Derek deserved another chance to prove himself as a father. The family began splitting into camps, with heated arguments breaking out during phone calls and social media exchanges. Some relatives accused me of being vindictive and using the children as weapons against Derek, while others praised my courage in protecting Sarah and Tommy from further harm. Holiday gatherings that had once been peaceful became battlegrounds, where different factions fought over the narrative of what had really happened. Throughout this painful period, Amanda proved to be my strongest advocate and source of emotional stability. She attended family meetings with me, providing an objective, outside perspective that helped me maintain my sanity when facing coordinated gaslighting from Derek's supporters. Amanda had grown up in a healthier family environment and was able to point out the dysfunctional patterns that I had learned to accept as normal. Amanda helped me understand that my family's treatment of me was not typical sibling rivalry, but rather a form of emotional abuse called scapegoating, where one family member is consistently blamed for problems caused by others. She showed me research about family addiction dynamics and helped me recognize that my parents' enabling of Derek's behavior was a form of codependency. that ultimately harmed everyone involved, including Derek himself. The CPS investigation continued to uncover disturbing evidence of Derek's pattern of neglect and irresponsibility. Caseworker Janet Morrison interviewed neighbors who reported hearing the children crying at night and seeing them playing outside unsupervised for hours at a time. Several neighbors had considered calling Child Protective Services in the past, but hesitated because they did not want to interfere in family business. Derek's ex-wife Lisa provided additional documentation of his unreliable behavior during previous court-ordered visitations. She submitted photos of the children returning from Derek's house wearing dirty clothes and looking undernourished, along with recordings of voicemails where Derek tried to manipulate her into taking extra custody time so he could pursue his gambling activities. Lisa also revealed that Derek had been threatening to disappear with the children if she continued pursuing unpaid child support through the courts. As the evidence mounted, I began seriously considering the possibility of seeking legal guardianship of Sarah and Tommy. My financial situation was stable. I had a supportive partner in Amanda, and most importantly, the children felt safe and secure with me. The idea of becoming a parent at 32 had never been part of my life plan, but these circumstances were extraordinary and required extraordinary responses. Amanda was incredibly supportive of my desire to provide a permanent home for the children. She had grown attached to Sarah and Tommy during their visits and could see the positive impact that a stable, loving environment was having on their emotional recovery. Together, we began researching the legal requirements for kinship adoption and consulting with family law attorneys about the best way to proceed. The most shocking revelation came when I discovered the true nature of Derek's Christmas week activities. Using his credit card statements and phone GPS data, I was able to track his movements during the time he claimed to be in Alaska. Instead of flying to Fairbanks to see the Aurora Borealis, Derek had driven 3 hours to a tribal casino in Michigan, where he spent 4 days gambling away money he had borrowed against his car title. Security footage from the casino showed Derek living it up in their hotel restaurant, ordering expensive steaks and premium whiskey, while his children shivered on my doorstep. The timestamps on the video proved that Derek was playing blackjack and slot machines at the exact time Sarah and Tommy were being discovered by Mrs. Henderson and taken into protective custody. While his children were being treated for hypothermia, Derek was celebrating a modest winning streak at the poker tables. This evidence was the final piece needed to completely destroy Derek's credibility and demonstrate the calculated nature of his abandonment. He had not made an impulsive mistake or fallen victim to unfortunate circumstances. He had deliberately chosen to pursue his addiction while knowing full well that his children were in danger. The once-in-a-lifetime Aurora display story was revealed to be one of the most callous lies imaginable, designed to make his selfishness seem noble and adventurous. Armed with casino security footage, credit card statements, and hotel records that irrefutably proved Derek's whereabouts during his supposed Alaska trip, I felt ready to present a comprehensive case to my parents and force them to confront the reality of their son's behavior. I spent an entire evening organizing the evidence into a clear timeline that left no room for doubt or alternative explanations. The materials painted a devastating picture of Derek's Christmas week activities. Credit card receipts showed charges at gas stations along the route to Michigan meals, at casino restaurants, hotel accommodations, and significant gambling losses at electronic gaming machines. His phone's GPS tracking data confirmed that he had never traveled more than 200 miles from Ohio, spending the entire time at a tribal casino resort while claiming to be viewing natural wonders in the Arctic wilderness. I arranged another family meeting at my parents' house, but this time I brought Amanda for moral support and Uncle Roy as a witness to ensure that my parents could not later claim I had misrepresented the evidence. The three of us sat across from Frank and Patricia in their living room, while I methodically presented each piece of documentation that exposed Derek's deception. The casino security footage was particularly damning. The video showed Derek laughing and drinking with strangers at poker tables, clearly enjoying himself while his children were being rescued from life-threatening exposure. Timestamps on the footage corresponded exactly with the period when Sarah and Tommy were discovered on my porch and taken to the hospital for treatment of hypothermia. The contrast between Derek's celebration and his children's suffering was morally repugnant. I also presented medical records from the emergency room visit that documented the severity of the children's condition when they were found. Sarah had suffered first-degree frostbite on 3 fingers, and both children showed signs of dehydration and mild hypothermia. The attending physician's notes indicated that the children could have died if they had been outside much longer, making Derek's abandonment a potentially fatal act of neglect. Despite the overwhelming evidence, my parents' reaction was even more shocking than I had anticipated. Instead of expressing outrage at Derek's deception and concern for their grandchildren's welfare, Frank and Patricia became increasingly defensive and irrational in their attempts to protect their younger son's reputation. Patricia actually suggested that the casino footage might be doctored, or that Derek might have an identical twin brother who had been impersonating him. When I pointed out the absurdity of these theories, she became tearful and accused me of orchestrating an elaborate conspiracy to frame Derek for crimes he did not commit. Frank insisted that Derek must have had good reasons for his actions that we simply did not understand yet. Their denial became so extreme that they began questioning my own motives for gathering evidence against Derek. Patricia accused me of being jealous of Derek's adventurous spirit and suggested that I had always resented being the boring, responsible son, while Derek got to live freely. Frank claimed that I was trying to steal Derek's children because Amanda and I were unable to have kids of our own, a particularly cruel accusation that had no basis in reality. The meeting ended with my parents demanding that I stop harassing Derek and threatening to cut off contact with me if I continued to attack their son. They refused to acknowledge any of the evidence and maintained their belief that Derek was the victim of a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by government bureaucrats and family members with ulterior motives. Uncle Roy was visibly shaken by the interaction and later told me that he had never seen such extreme denial and enabling behavior in his entire life. As a retired social worker, he recognized the psychological patterns my parents were exhibiting and warned me that they might never be capable of accepting the truth about Derek's character and actions. Meanwhile, Derek had returned to Ohio and was attempting to control the narrative by reaching out to extended family members with his own version of events. He told relatives that I had fabricated evidence against him out of jealousy, and that he was the victim of a conspiracy designed to steal his children. Derek claimed that his trip to Alaska had been legitimate, but that he had lost his documentation in a luggage mishap and could not prove his whereabouts. Derek also began portraying himself as a loving father, who had been temporarily overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. He told family members that he had been struggling with depression following his divorce and that his brief absence had been a desperate attempt to clear his head and become a better parent. This version of events painted Derek as sympathetic and flawed, rather than calculating and cruel. Some relatives began to believe Derek's manipulation tactics, especially those who had limited direct contact with the children and were not aware of the extent of his neglect. Derek was skilled at presenting himself as charming and misunderstood, and he used these abilities to create doubt about the severity of his actions among family members who wanted to believe the best about him. The psychological toll of being gaslit by my entire family was enormous, and I began to question my own perceptions of reality despite having overwhelming evidence on my side. Amanda became concerned about my mental health as I struggled with feelings of isolation and self-doubt. She insisted that I seek counseling to help process the trauma of being scapegoated by my family while trying to protect vulnerable children. My therapist helped me understand that my family's reaction was not unusual in cases involving addiction and abuse. She explained that family members often engage in collective denial to avoid confronting painful truths about someone they love. The therapist also helped me recognize that my decision to prioritize the children's safety over family harmony was morally correct, regardless of the social pressure I was experiencing. As the investigation progressed, CPS caseworker Janet Morrison uncovered additional evidence of Derek's criminal behavior that went far beyond child abandonment. Derek's former employer had filed a complaint with local law enforcement, alleging that Derek had embezzled thousands of dollars from client insurance settlements to fund his gambling addiction. The embezzlement had been discovered during a routine audit after Derek's termination. Financial records revealed that Derek had been systematically stealing money from insurance claims over a period of several months, using sophisticated techniques to hide his theft from supervisors. He had created fake documentation to justify disbursements and had manipulated computer systems to cover his tracks. The total amount stolen exceeded $15,000, making the charges potential felonies with serious prison time. This information explained Derek's desperation to flee during the Christmas holiday. He was not only hiding from loan sharks who wanted their gambling debts repaid, he was also trying to avoid arrest for embezzlement charges that were being prepared by prosecutors. The abandonment of his children was part of a larger pattern of avoiding responsibility for his criminal behavior. The most devastating revelation came when Derek's ex-wife Lisa contacted me to provide additional information about his pattern of irresponsible behavior. Lisa revealed that Christmas Eve had not been the first time Derek had abandoned the children with inadequate supervision. 6 months earlier, Derek had left Sarah and Tommy with Lisa's elderly mother while he went to Las Vegas for what he claimed was a business conference, but was actually a gambling expedition. Lisa had kept quiet about that incident to protect Derek's relationship with his children, but she now realized that her silence had enabled his escalating neglect. She provided documentation of Derek's inconsistent visitation schedule, his failure to pay court-ordered child support, and his history of lying about his employment and financial status. Lisa's testimony would be crucial in any legal proceedings regarding custody and Derek's criminal charges. The mounting evidence of Derek's criminal behavior and pattern of child neglect gave me the legal foundation I needed to take decisive action to protect Sarah and Tommy. I hired Robert Walsh, a family law attorney with extensive experience in kinship custody cases, to help me navigate the complex legal process of gaining permanent guardianship of the children. Robert was impressed by the comprehensive documentation I had gathered and confirmed that Derek's behavior constituted clear grounds for termination of his parental rights. The combination of child abandonment, embezzlement charges, gambling addiction, and demonstrated pattern of neglect created a compelling case that Derek was unfit to parent his children. Robert estimated that we had an excellent chance of success if we moved quickly while Derek was distracted by his criminal defense. The first step was filing a formal petition for kinship custody with the family court, along with a comprehensive brief documenting Derek's unfitness as a parent. The petition included sworn affidavits from Mrs. Henderson describing the condition of the children when she found the medical records, documenting their hypothermia, and frostbite evidence of Derek's embezzlement and gambling addiction, and testimony from neighbors and teachers who had observed signs of neglect. Simultaneously, I worked with CPS to ensure that Derek's supervised visitation privileges would remain strictly limited until the court could make a permanent determination about custody. Janet Morrison supported my petition and agreed to testify about the department's findings regarding Derek's pattern of child endangerment. Her professional opinion carried significant weight with family court judges who regularly relied on CPS recommendations. One of the most difficult but necessary decisions I made during this period was to establish firm boundaries with my parents and Derek regarding contact and manipulation attempts. I informed them in writing that I would no longer participate in family meetings or phone calls that involved denial of Derek's actions or attempts to blame me for the consequences of his behavior. Amanda supported this decision wholeheartedly and helped me recognize that protecting my own mental health was essential to my ability to advocate effectively for the children. We agreed that my parents and Derek could have supervised contact with Sarah and Tommy only if they acknowledged the reality of the situation and committed to supporting the children's recovery, rather than continuing to enable Derek's destructive behavior. The no-contact boundary was emotionally painful but ultimately liberating. I no longer had to defend objective reality against coordinated gaslighting or justify my decision to prioritize child safety over family loyalty. The psychological relief of stepping away from toxic family dynamics allowed me to focus my energy on providing stability and healing for Sarah and Tommy. Building a new support network became crucial to my success as a guardian and advocate. Uncle Roy and Aunt Susan became my primary family allies, offering both emotional support and practical assistance with childcare and transportation. Several neighbors who had witnessed Derek's neglect volunteered to serve as character witnesses and provided statements supporting my fitness as a guardian. Amanda's family also embraced Sarah and Tommy, providing them with additional adult role models and expanding their sense of belonging in a healthy family system. The children thrived in this environment of consistent care and genuine affection, showing remarkable resilience as they began to heal from months of instability and trauma. Meanwhile, Derek's legal situation continued to deteriorate as prosecutors moved forward with formal embezzlement charges. He was arrested and released on bond, but the conditions of his release prohibited him from leaving the state and required him to surrender his passport. Derek's criminal defense attorney advised him that plea negotiations would likely involve prison time and restitution payments that would leave him financially ruined for years. The reality of potential incarceration forced Derek to finally acknowledge the seriousness of his situation, but his response continued to focus on self-pity rather than genuine remorse for the harm he had caused his children. Derek contacted several family members seeking financial assistance for his legal defense, claiming that he was being unfairly prosecuted and that the charges were exaggerated. When these appeals for financial help were unsuccessful, Derek attempted to use his children as leverage to manipulate family members into supporting him. He claimed that he would lose all contact with Sarah and Tommy if he went to prison, and that this would traumatize them more than his original abandonment. Derek's manipulation tactics revealed his continued inability to prioritize his children's welfare over his own interests. The family court hearing on my custody petition was scheduled for early February, giving Derek's attorney time to mount a defense, but not enough time for Derek to complete any meaningful rehabilitation programs. Robert Walsh advised me that Derek's recent arrest would significantly strengthen our case, as it demonstrated that his problems were escalating rather than improving. As part of my preparation for the custody hearing, I underwent a comprehensive home study conducted by a court-appointed social worker who evaluated my fitness as a guardian. The evaluation included interviews with Amanda, background checks, financial reviews, and assessments of my parenting skills during interactions with Sarah and Tommy. The home study results were overwhelmingly positive, with the social worker noting the children's obvious comfort and attachment to me and Amanda. Sarah and Tommy had begun calling our apartment home and were clearly thriving in our care. Their behavior problems and anxiety symptoms had decreased significantly, and they were beginning to show age-appropriate curiosity and playfulness that had been suppressed during their father's neglectful care. The most powerful evidence in our favor came from the children themselves during their confidential interviews with the court-appointed guardian ad litem. Sarah and Tommy clearly expressed their desire to live permanently with me and Amanda, describing feeling safe and loved in our home. They also articulated their fear of returning to their father's care using age-appropriate language to describe the chaos and unpredictability of their previous living situation. Derek's ex-wife, Lisa, provided crucial testimony that devastated any remaining credibility he might have had as a parent. Lisa revealed the previous abandonment incident in Las Vegas, and provided documentation of Derek's pattern of manipulating custody schedules to accommodate his gambling activities. Her willingness to testify against Derek despite their complicated history demonstrated her genuine concern for their children's welfare. The final blow to Derek's case came when his former employer's representative testified about the embezzlement investigation and provided evidence that Derek had been stealing money intended to help accident victims and their families. This testimony established Derek not only as a negligent parent, but also as someone who preyed on vulnerable people for personal gain, making him an unsuitable role model for impressionable children. Throughout this legal process, I maintained careful documentation of every interaction and decision to ensure that my actions would withstand scrutiny from Derek's attorney and family members who continued to support him. I kept detailed records of the children's medical appointments, school performance, emotional progress, and statements about their preferences and fears regarding custody arrangements. The family court hearing took place on a cold February morning in a packed courtroom filled with social workers, attorneys, and family members who had come to support various sides of the custody dispute. Judge Martha Richardson, a respected family law jurist with 20 years of experience, presided over the proceedings with obvious concern for the children's welfare and little patience for legal maneuvering that did not serve their best interests. Derek's attorney made a valiant effort to portray his client as a loving father who had made mistakes but deserved another chance to prove himself. They argued that Derek's gambling addiction was a medical condition that could be treated with appropriate intervention, and that separating him permanently from his children would cause more harm than good. Derek himself testified tearfully about his love for Sarah and Tommy, and his commitment to becoming a better parent. However, the evidence against Derek was simply overwhelming. Robert Walsh methodically presented documentation of Derek's pattern of neglect, the Christmas Eve abandonment, his embezzlement charges, gambling addiction, and history of lying to family members and authorities. The casino security footage was particularly damaging, showing Derek celebrating while his children suffered from exposure. The testimony from Sarah and Tommy's guardian ad litem was the turning point in the hearing. She reported that both children had clearly expressed their desire to live with me and Amanda permanently, and had demonstrated significant anxiety about returning to their father's care. The children's voices carried enormous weight with Judge Richardson, who emphasized that their safety and emotional well-being were the court's primary concerns. CPS caseworker Janet Morrison testified about the department's findings regarding Derek's unfitness as a parent and strongly recommended that custody be awarded to me as the children's uncle. She noted that Sarah and Tommy had thrived in my care and that removing them from my home would likely cause additional trauma after months of instability. Judge Richardson's decision was swift and decisive. She awarded me full legal and physical custody of Sarah and Tommy, with Derek receiving only supervised visitation rights contingent on his completion of gambling addiction treatment parenting classes and community service related to his embezzlement conviction. The judge commended my commitment to the children's welfare and noted that my actions had likely saved their lives. Derek's reaction to losing custody was a mixture of rage and self-pity. He shouted accusations at me as court security escorted him from the building, claiming that I had orchestrated a conspiracy to steal his children. His inability to accept responsibility for his actions, even in the face of legal consequences, demonstrated that his fundamental character had not changed, despite the severity of his situation. The criminal proceedings against Derek concluded 3 weeks later with a plea agreement that resulted in a suspended 2-year prison sentence contingent on his completion of addiction treatment payment, of full restitution to his former employer, and 1,000 hours of community service. Derek would remain on probation for 5 years and would face immediate incarceration if he violated any terms of his agreement. While Derek avoided prison time, the financial consequences of his actions were severe. He was required to pay back over $15,000 in stolen insurance money, along with court costs and legal fees that totaled several thousand additional dollars. Derek's credit was destroyed. He had lost his professional license, and he faced years of financial hardship as he attempted to rebuild his life. The resolution of the legal proceedings allowed my parents to finally confront the reality of Derek's behavior and their own role in enabling his destructive patterns. Faced with the possibility of losing contact with their grandchildren entirely, Frank and Patricia agreed to attend family therapy sessions focused on understanding addiction dynamics and learning healthier communication patterns. The therapy process was slow and often painful, but it gradually helped my parents recognize how their favoritism and enabling had contributed to Derek's inability to accept responsibility for his actions. They began to understand that their attempts to protect Derek from consequences had actually prevented him from getting the help he needed and had put his children in serious danger. My relationship with my parents slowly began to heal as they made genuine efforts to acknowledge the harm they had caused through years of scapegoating me and enabling Derek. Patricia wrote me a heartfelt letter apologizing for blaming me for Derek's actions and expressing gratitude for my willingness to protect Sarah and Tommy when their own father had failed them. Frank also made efforts to rebuild our relationship, acknowledging that he had been unfair in his expectations that I would always be available to clean up Derek's messes. He began to appreciate the sacrifices I had made to provide stability for his grandchildren and expressed pride in my character and integrity rather than taking my reliability for granted. Derek's path to redemption was much more uncertain. He completed the court-mandated addiction treatment program and attended supervised visits with his children, but his interactions with Sarah and Tommy remained strained and awkward. The children were polite but distant with their father, clearly preferring the stability and warmth of life with Amanda and me. Over time, Derek began to show genuine signs of understanding the harm his actions had caused. He stopped making excuses for his behavior and started taking responsibility for the choices that had led to losing custody of his children. Derek expressed gratitude that I had been willing to provide a safe home for Sarah and Tommy when he had been unable to care for them properly. The relationship between Derek and his children evolved into something more like that of a distant uncle than a father. Sarah and Tommy maintained contact with Derek through monthly supervised visits, but they clearly understood that I was their primary parent and that their security depended on my continued commitment to their welfare. This arrangement allowed them to have some connection to their biological father while protecting them from his continued instability. Amanda and my relationship grew stronger throughout this crisis as we discovered our ability to work together under extreme stress and our shared commitment to providing a loving home for children who needed us. The experience of becoming instant parents to traumatized kids tested every aspect of our partnership, but we emerged more united and confident in our ability to handle whatever challenges life might present. 18 months after the custody hearing, Amanda and I were married in a small ceremony that included Sarah and Tommy as active participants in our vows. The children had requested to be part of the wedding ceremony, and we included promises to continue being their family and protecting their future. The wedding represented not just our commitment to each other, but our dedication to the family we had created through love and choice, rather than biology. 2 years after gaining custody, I formally adopted Sarah and Tommy with Derek's consent. Derek had come to understand that adoption would provide the children with greater legal security and inheritance rights, and he had developed enough maturity to put their interests ahead of his own ego. The adoption was finalized on a sunny spring morning, with both children expressing excitement about officially becoming part of our family. The children have thrived in their new environment, excelling in school, and developing healthy friendships with other kids in our neighborhood. Sarah has shown particular talent in art and music, while Tommy has discovered a love of sports and outdoor activities. Both children have learned to trust that the adults in their lives will be consistent and reliable, allowing them to develop the confidence and security that had been missing during their early years. Looking back on this experience, I have learned that real family is defined not by blood relationships, but by love commitment and the willingness to sacrifice for each other's welfare. The crisis revealed the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually demonstrate that love through their actions when circumstances become difficult. I also learned the importance of setting boundaries with toxic family members, even when doing so causes social pressure and emotional pain. Protecting innocent children from harm required me to prioritize their safety over family loyalty. And I discovered that this was the most loving thing I could do for everyone involved, including Derek himself. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the greatest disasters in our lives can lead to the most meaningful blessings. Derek's abandonment of his children was a terrible act that could have resulted in tragedy. But it also gave me the opportunity to become a father to two wonderful kids who needed a safe home, and gave Amanda and me the chance to create the family we had always wanted. Today, Sarah is 11 and Tommy is 9, and they are happy, healthy children who have learned to trust that their home will always be a place of safety and love. They occasionally see their biological father during supervised visits, but they understand that I am their real dad in every way that matters. Amanda is the only mother they really remember, and our family bonds have grown stronger with each passing year. The experience taught me that family is something you build through daily acts of love and commitment, not something you inherit through genetics. Sarah, Tommy, Amanda, and I chose each other, and that choice has created relationships that are deeper and more meaningful than any biological connection could ever be. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was morally right? How do you think you would handle discovering that someone you love was putting innocent people at risk through their actions? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel for more true family stories. Sharing this video might help other families going through similar crises feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. May you always have the courage to protect the innocent, even when it comes at great personal cost.